trade frictions between China and the US. We've talked about it, we've even worried about it, and we're now living through it. But amidst the angry rhetoric and the tit-for-tat tariffs, there's one element to this trade tiff that we maybe haven't given much thought about, an element that President Trump himself refuses to discuss. The US has a trade surplus with China when it comes to the services industry. So is this a distraction from the main battle, or is it a weapon in China's armory that might just help them to win the war? Plus, say hello to the world's latest celebrity leader. Pakistan's cricket star turned politician Imran Khan is poised to become the country's new Prime Minister. How will Pakistan fare with Khan at the crease? And will China be bowled over by the country's newest leader? Welcome to The Point. I'm Jeff Moody, sitting in for Liu Xin. The US-China trade war has now moved beyond rhetoric and into live ammunition territory. President Trump has repeatedly called out the US-China trade deficit in goods totaling $375 billion as calculated in its own way when he initially staged the trade war with China. However, when it comes to the services sector, America's pillar industry, the US had a services trade surplus with China of around $52 billion in 2016. That's according to the US-China Business Council. Between 2007 and 2016, US services exports to China increased more than 300%, while services exports to the rest of the world increased about 50%. So is the US-China services surplus not worth at least mentioning? Why has Trump conveniently been evading this rather large detail? And as the trade war continues apace, how will the services sector in both countries be affected? Well, joining me today in Beijing, we have Dr. Zhang Jianping, Director at the Center for Regional Economic Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and in Hong Kong, Dr. Feingold, the Senior Advisor at the DC Int'l Advisory. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Dr. Zhang, let's start with you. Let's go back to basics, if we mean. What do we mean exactly when we say services industry?
I noticed that President Trump never mentioned their, service surplus, their surplus for trading service before. Actually, in the U.S., service sectors occupied maybe 80% this type of level, but in China, in China's GDP, only 52%, contributed by service sectors. So that means the U.S. is good at, service, trading service. Also, they can, they have very obvious advantages. That's why you may find that they can export their, trading service not only to China but to all over the world.
Yes, but what do we actually mean when we say service? Are we talking about people that come out of America and come to work in China? What do we actually mean by the service industry?
Yeah, I think that on one hand, for a service view, provided to those residents, to those people who are living in the U.S. or who are living in China. On the other hand, service sectors can provide service to those manufacturing sectors, to those agriculture sectors, to all, production chain and supply chain.
So it's not just people, is it? We're not just talking about people that have up sticks from America and have moved to China. We're also talking about ideas. We're talking about China, the US renting ideas from China, aren't we?
I think that actually in the US, in the past several years, actually they become more and more, good at service development in China. On the other hand, in China's market, service sectors, contribution gradually climbing up. Actually, for every year, maybe 1% of service sectors expansion in China's markets. That's why you can find that U.S. can get, have so a lot of opportunities and get profit in China's market.
Dr. Feingold, is it fair to say that President Trump is glossing over all this information? He does seem so busy railing China about the fact that there's a trade deficit of $375 billion, and he's going through his books with a fine-tooth comb, making sure that every country plays fair by America. Is he deliberately not mentioning the fact that there's a trade surplus in the services industry?
Well, President Trump is aware that there is a surplus for U.S. services exports to China. But there are two issues here. One, the size of this surplus is so much smaller than the deficit for the trade in goods. And that's just a reality. And you cited the statistical figures that show how much larger the trade in goods deficit is. The other issue when it comes to services and some of the things that are covered by services trade, and you asked the question, what is it? You know, the classic example of a services export would be a license, for example, to use something like software. But one of the concerns of the U.S. government when it comes to services trade with China is the issue of piracy, which obviously President Trump has in fact spoken about. So at one level, one could say that the U.S. services trade with China, the surplus would actually be even larger if the concerns about piracy were adequately addressed by the Chinese side.
I mean, yes, you're right, the deficit is much, much higher than the surplus. But if you talk about the deficit without including that services surplus, you're skewing the figures, aren't you? So it's not an accurate picture of where we are. Having said that, though, can we realistically count it, though? Do you really think that goods and services are two completely things, or is it fair to lump them in together like this?
Well, the party should always be talking about market access for both goods and for services, and eliminating restrictions that prevent, I mean, from the U.S. side, obviously they want to eliminate restrictions that prevent the access for both U.S. goods as well as services to the Chinese market. Of course, the Chinese market has become increasingly important to exporters in the United States. And we know from all the recent discussion that American companies, regardless of the types of products that they are exporting, whether it's a good, whether it's an agricultural good, a manufactured good, or a service, American companies do want access to the Chinese market. Both the export of goods and services do support many thousands of U.S. jobs. And it would be unfair to say that President Trump doesn't want to expand that. In fact, he wants more access for U.S. companies. And obviously, the Chinese side wants to ensure that Chinese goods, and to a lesser extent services, because services exports from China to the U.S. are relatively modest. Obviously, the Chinese side wants to ensure that Chinese goods maintain the access to the U.S. market. But the reality remains that the deficit in the goods is so much larger that any conversation about bilateral trade, yes, it should include both goods and services, but the parties cannot escape the reality of how much larger this goods deficit is in favor of the Chinese side.
Dr. Zhang, we've heard a great deal recently about American companies that have suffered in the trade war. I mean, soybean farmers is an example that comes to mind. But has that trade war touched U.S. services companies yet?
I'm afraid yes. Actually, you know that service provider, will provide their service to not only farmers, but also manufacturing sectors and other service sectors. So given that farmers and manufacturing sectors suffering from that, also a lot of service sectors will be seriously impacted. On the other hand, you may find that due to worsen trade relationship and economic relationship, I'm afraid that in the near future, maybe for tourist sectors, education sectors, medical sectors, and even if those transportation and logistics sectors, all of those sectors actually for U.S. side in the past they get so lot of profit from Chinese side, but in the near future I'm afraid that also maybe will be impacted to different extent.
Yes, and of course another sector that we haven't included so far and talked about so far is the financial sector. Dr. Feingold, how would your financial sector be affected by a trade war, for example?
Well, it's a very interesting question because so much of the decision making here is actually with the Chinese side, because the Chinese side has the ability to expand access for U.S. financial services to clients, customers in China. And if the Chinese side, in response to U.S. action on the goods trade, were to make it more difficult or to slow down the pace of market access reform for U.S. financial services companies, then the U.S. trade and services surplus is not going to grow, and it's just going to lead to more tension in the overall trade relationship. So obviously the U.S. side wants the Chinese side to expand access for financial services along with other services. And if the Chinese side was to slow down the pace, it would make it difficult to resolve the overall tension in the relationship.
And of course, we've got to say that this is a bit hypothetical at the moment. All eyes are looking on goods and tariffs that come alongside them. But what do you think, Dr. Feingold, what do you think a trade war in the services industry would look like?
Well, the starting point would be to move more slowly on access for U.S. companies to the Chinese services market. And that is something that the Chinese side could actually implement relatively quickly, in the sense that they just make a decision that we're not going to expand access rapidly. Another aspect which was mentioned earlier would be tourism and education. So if Chinese tourists were to reduce the frequency of travel to the United States, if state-owned tour agencies travel by company employees from state-owned companies were to decide to travel to Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia, other parts of the world other than the United States, again, that is a decision that the Chinese side could take relatively easily. Same thing with the education sector. If Chinese students were to be discouraged from studying in the United States at the university level, graduate school level, where the tuition fees are quite high and does contribute significantly to the U.S. services surplus, this is a decision that the Chinese government could take to encourage students to study in other parts of the world, and that would disadvantage U.S. universities that do benefit from inbound students. So these decisions are very much in the hands of the Chinese government, how much it wants to move as far as access or restriction on these services trades.
Dr. Zhang, it's ironic, isn't it, that China has been upgrading its manufacturing sector for so long now and moving to the services economy. It's looking at the services economy as the answer to all its problems, while Trump has vowed to revive the manufacturing sector in the US in what is at the moment a service-dominated economy. It's impossible to know where you stand these days, isn't it?
Oh, this is a very interesting question. Actually, for China right now, we hope we can increase our, capacity and, contribution from service sectors. Maybe for every year, 1% of service sectors contribution climbing up. On the other hand, we hope that manufacturing sector, can reduce maybe 1% or more. But it will take a long time to restructure China's economy. But for U.S., as you mentioned, just on the contrary, the U.S. side in the past, so a lot of manufacturing sectors escaped from the U.S. Nowadays, President Trump wants to, attract some of them, back to the U.S. So in this regard, I hope that between China and the U.S., actually we have opportunities to work together, to cooperate. But the precondition is that U.S. should welcome China's investors, on this aspect. But on the other hand, I'd like to mention that China now is upgrading our manufacturing sectors as well as promote service sectors development, especially in free trade experimental zones in 11 provinces. In the near future, there will be more provinces have their free trade zones where most of foreign investors will concentrate in service sectors and high-tech sectors. In that progress, I do believe that more and more foreign investors can benefit from those opening up and reform. Especially, I noticed that recently over there, foreign-funded enterprises, new setup, new setting up this type of foreign-funded enterprises, the number already doubled. So it shows that actually most of foreign investors has better expectation on China's market. So in this regard, I hope that the U.S. side also can appreciate this type of change in the near future.
Okay, on that note, Mr. Zhang Jianping, Director at the Center for Regional Economic Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and Dr. Ross Feingold, the Senior Advisor at the DC International Advisory. Thank you both very much indeed. Well, let's take a short break now, but when we come back, the cricketer takes the stumps. A familiar face breathes new life into Pakistan. But what's in store for the country, and what will its relationship be with its iron brother? Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, Imran Khan, the former cricket celebrity and friend of Princess Diana, is poised to become Pakistan's new Prime Minister. His party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, or PTI, won the most seats in the country's general election, with 115 out of the 270 available seats in last Wednesday's vote. That's according to Pakistan's Election Commission. Well, the party will need to form a coalition government, however, as it failed to win an outright majority in the National Assembly. Well, Khan is taking over with a bit of a full in tray, you could say, a capricious currency, persistent inflation, mounting debt, ongoing security issues, and an unravelling relationship with the US. Now, they're just the first issues he has to deal with on day one. Well, a seasoned celebrity, Imran Khan, rounded up support on a sizzling ticket of anti-corruption and populism, coining the slogan New Pakistan, or Naya Pakistan. But behind the veneer of catchphrases and celebrity faces, what's the real substance to Imran Khan's vision? And how will his appointment shape the country's relationship with its iron brother, China? In the past, Khan has been a fierce critic of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. But, like another celebrity-turned-politician that we all know and love, things said on the campaign trail aren't always the same as what's said in office. Well, joining me for today's discussion are Zoon Ahmed Khan, a research fellow at Tsinghua University, and Xiyu, senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much for joining me. Let's start with you, Ms. Khan. Whether people believe him or not, whether people voted for him or not, you have to say there's no denying that his victory is seismic, isn't it? This is huge for Pakistan.
Well, I would actually agree with you 100% on that statement, because Pakistan is going through a phase of political awakening. And we have seen the same politicians, the same families, PPP, PMLN, coming into power for the past decades. And this is really the first time that a new face, talking about change, really talking about issues that affect the common man, has come into power. And 115 seats out of 200 and more than 270 is not a small victory. You mentioned also that Imran Khan is a celebrity, he has turned into a politician, but Imran Khan is not someone who made it here without a struggle. He started with one seat 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, in the National Assembly, and he has so far, slowly, through a big, long period of struggle, made it where he is today.
Absolutely.
So this is a massive victory.
Yeah, it is, and obviously we must credit Khan and his team for bringing about that victory. But we must also credit Pakistanis themselves, mustn't we? Because it takes a lot for a nation to turn its back on its political history, on these dynasties that you've had in Pakistan, and say, enough is enough, it's time for something new.
Right.
How does it feel for you personally, being a Pakistani today?
Well, I would say that let's not forget that this is the first time in Pakistan's history that two elected governments have completed their tenure. So democratically speaking, in terms of the democratic process, Pakistan is actually a very young country. And seeing that, we can see how the Pakistani people in these two tenures have made this long, massive journey to really understand the value of their vote. And it is a huge victory, I think, for Pakistanis, because they have been politically awakened in many ways. They have become critical of their governments. I would also like to add that you mentioned the fiscal and the economic crises that Pakistan is facing. The fact that just after the election, the dollar has gone from 130 to 122, the stock market is performing better, and also that Imran Khan was re-elected in the KPK, which is a province that never re-elects governments that don't perform, unlike the other provinces of Pakistan, show that he really is someone who's investing in the grassroots levels and investing in things that traditional politicians have not before.
Of course, people are making, they're comparing him, aren't they, to other people? I mean, some people are saying he's Pakistan's Trump because he's been elected on a populist ticket. But I mean, I would say he reminds me more of a Tony Blair in the UK or a Barack Obama in the US, coming in with a sweeping change. But there's a danger with that, because Tony Blair is now one of the least popular prime ministers our country's ever had, Britain, and Barack Obama didn't have the success that he wanted to, because you just can't achieve that. And we have to remember, the thing with Imran Khan is he hasn't got a majority, has he?
Well, actually, to be fair, he's very close to a majority. And in these cases, we have the independents, which are almost 29 independents, if I'm not incorrect, that would be happy to partner with him, and also smaller political parties such as the PMLQ and also the MQM could be willing to help him get that majority. So that is not a big concern. But also, when you say that he is like a Trump, I understand that these people who come with like charisma, populist, you know, maybe a lot of people outside Pakistan feel that there's so many high expectations from him, but he does have a very experienced team. And that is something which makes me very positive about this. It's not just a new face with a new team that has no idea how politics works. He really did make sure that he has some very seasoned politicians, and at the same time he comes with a new strategy, a new mindset towards how to govern a country like Pakistan.
So it's not just style over substance. He has got a substance
I
to him.
definitely don't think so, yes.
Young Xiyu, let's look at Khan's relationship then, his leadership rather, in terms of his strategic partner, China. The Foreign Ministry spokesman, Gang Shuang, said on Friday, China has kept an eye on the general election of Pakistan, I bet it has, and sincerely hopes the country can realize a smooth political transition and keep stability for better development. Is he the candidate Beijing preferred, do you think? Is Beijing happy with this?
Well, you cannot use happy or unhappy to describe China's feeling on the fundamental changes in the politics of Pakistan, because China's way of thinking is like this. To some degree, the surprising change or a surprising victory by the new Prime Minister really indicate the acceleration of the political transition in Pakistan. It's a course. And the course is accelerated. So no matter you like or dislike, that is the objective trend. So you have to face, you have to deal with the reality. So that is the fundamental basic feeling and attitudes from China to Pakistan. And secondly, the decades-long friendship and the cooperation history between the two countries actually has built up a very solid base for the bilateral ties between the two countries. That means no matter what kind of political figures in the capital of Pakistan, the figure has to face the reality, just like China has to face the reality of the accelerated changes in Pakistan. And by the same token, the new leader has to face the reality of the already existed relationship between the two countries. So basically, the stability is the fundamental factor, but the new elements will certainly affect both of the capitals to adjust the bilateral ties in the future.
But you say that China doesn't mind who leads Pakistan. It's none of China's business who's leading the country. What's important is the ties between the two countries and the history between the two countries. But there are two major foreign policies that China has, which affect Pakistan, namely the China-Pakistan economic corridor. That's $62 billion worth of trade there. That's and of course Pakistan is the crown jewel in China's Belt and Road Initiative, the most important foreign policy put forward by Xi Jinping. So surely they care deeply who's at the helm of this, particularly now the man at the helm, Imran Khan, has spoken out in depth against the CPEC.
Okay, so I think I would like to emphasize that it's not that Imran Khan, his criticism was not directed towards the CPEC. In fact, it was an anti-corruption. It was a criticism against the government at that time, which he felt is not handling this investment in a way that was transparent, that was genuinely beneficial. And the other criticism he also made was that more of the investment is going towards the biggest province, Punjab. And as a Pakistani, even though I am a Punjabi, I agree that there should be more equitable distribution of the resources coming in through CPEC. So I think to understand his stance on CPEC as negative is not really accurate. And he also, in his speech that he made, his victory speech that he addressed, when he started speaking about foreign policy, the first country he mentioned was China.
Well, yes, and of course sorry to interrupt, and he tweeted, didn't he?
He tweeted in Chinese.
Yes, I mean, let's have a look at that now. He said, we will strengthen and improve our relationships with China. We want to work towards success of the CPEC. We also want to send teams to learn poverty alleviation from China, how to lift our most poor who can't even eat two meals a day. So he's coming to China for advice, isn't he?
Definitely. He seeks China's not just support in terms of CPEC, but also he's saying that there's so much Pakistan can learn from China, including China's anti-corruption campaign as well as poverty alleviation, both problems that have plagued our country for a very long time.
What do you think that China can do to help Pakistan when it comes to poverty alleviation?
Yes, but basically I think what China can do in that area mainly lie in the so-called software, say experiences, knowledges, even big lessons about removing the poverty. In other words, China has commanded a lot of good knowledge and bad knowledge about that. And China will certainly provide all we know to let Pakistan to go towards the right direction, avoid the mistake we used to make. So I think basically cooperation on the poverty, including cooperation on anti-corruption, will be a new areas for the cooperation between two countries.
Okay, I'm going to leave the last word to you, Zoon Ahmed Khan, and I'm going to ask you a very difficult question. Right. It's a complicated question that requires a huge answer, and I want you to answer it in one word.
In one word?
In one word, yes.
How many seconds do I have?
Very little. Is the relationship between Pakistan and the US better or worse under Imran Khan?
I think Imran Khan, as he mentioned in his speech, will try to balance Pakistan's foreign relations in a better way. We haven't been able to. Pakistan as a country cannot afford to go to war or have an animostic relationship with any country. So I think he will try to balance.
Good answer. Good answer. Well, thank you very much to both of you, Yang Xiyu and Zoon Ahmed Khan. That's it from me for this edition of The Point. Don't forget to download the app, CGTN, to watch your show again. And from me, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.